Hi students, and welcome to another e-lesson video, this one over an introduction to the Q2 rhetorical analysis essay. As with all of these e-lesson videos, please feel free to pause and rewind at any time to take notes, rewatch, or get caught up. Let's take a look at what we're doing in this video. We're going to start off looking at the AP Lang free response section. The whole section, what goes on with that. We're going to take a look at the Q2 writing task specifically, planning and organizing the Q2 essay, good practices and bad practices in composing that essay. We're going to take a look at the scoring guidelines, and then finally some sample Q2 rhetorical analysis essays. So the AP Lang free response section is one of two sections on the AP Lang exam. You've got your multiple choice section, which is worth 45% of your score, and then the free response section worth 55% of your score. In that free response section, you've got three free response questions. They're just essay questions. Question 1, your Q2, that's your synthesis essay, which is an expository research essay. You're given a series of sources, asked to look through those and explain something about a topic. Question 2, the Q2, that's your rhetorical analysis essay, which is an expository analytical essay. And then finally your Q3, which is your argumentative. It's a pure persuasive essay. The timing on this section, you're given a 15-minute planning period followed by 2 hours to compose, and you must pace your work accordingly. There is no one there to tell you to stop writing and move on to the next essay, You have to plan your timing very well. The Q2 writing task, question 2, is a rhetorical analysis question. You're given a short passage to read, given some limited information about that passage, some bits of the rhetorical situation, and then you're asked to analyze the rhetorical strategies the speaker employs. Let's take a look at a sample. Here is a page out of the 2003 AP Lang exam from the free response question section. This is the Q2 from 2003. We can look at these old Q2s because the rhetorical analysis prompts have not changed much in the last couple of decades. Let's zoom in here and take a look at what we see. You'll always see at the top here this suggested time 40 minutes. That's just, I don't know, a reminder of what 2 hours divided by 3 is, I guess. And then you're given your introductory information where you can get a little bit of the rhetorical situation. It's always very important to read this section thoroughly because they don't give much to you, but what they do give to you is vital to understanding the context and the rest of the rhetorical situation of this piece. So here we go. Alfred M. Greene delivered the following speech in Philadelphia in April 1861, the first month of the Civil War. African Americans were not yet permitted to join the Union Army, but Greene felt that they should strive to be admitted to the ranks and prepare to enlist. Read the speech carefully, then write an essay in which you analyze the methods that Greene uses to persuade his fellow African Americans to join the Union forces. All right. Analyze the methods Greene uses to persuade. Same thing as rhetorical strategies used to persuade. So how does he access those available means of persuasion dictated by this situation to persuade his fellow African Americans to do this? Cool. Let's read the passage. With all of the PDF files that I'm looking at here in this video, please keep in mind that I've made them all available for download with this e-lesson on the Learning Hub site. I highly encourage that you download them and either print them out and read them while I read them or pull them up on your screen while I read them. Reading them off of the video screen might be kind of blurry. So let's take a look at Greene's speech here. The time has arrived in the history of the great republic when we may again give evidence to the world of the bravery and patriotism of a race in whose hearts burn the love of country, of freedom, and of civil and religious toleration. It is these grand principles that enable men, however proscribed, when possessed of true patriotism, to say, "My country, right or wrong, I still love thee." It is true, the brave deeds of our fathers, sworn and subscribed to by the immortal Washington of the Revolution of 1776 and by Jackson and others in the War of 1812, have failed to bring us into recognition as citizens, enjoying those rights so dearly bought by those noble and patriotic sires. It is true that our injuries in many respects are great. Fugitive slave laws, Dred Scott decisions, indictments for treason, and long and dreary months of imprisonment. The reason of the most unfair rules of judicial investigation has been the pay we have received for our solicitude, sympathy, and aid in the dangers and difficulties of those days that tried men's souls. Our duty, brethren, is not to cavil over past grievances. Let us not be derelict to duty in the time of need. While we remember the past and regret that our present position in the country is not such as to create within us that burning zeal and enthusiasm for the field of battle which inspires other men in the full enjoyment of every civil and religious emolument, yet let us endeavor to hope for the future and improve the present auspicious moment for creating anew our claims upon the justice and honor of the Republic. And above all, let not the honor and glory achieved by our fathers be blasted or sullied by a want of true heroism among their sons. Let us then take up the sword, trusting in God who will defend the right, remembering that these are other days than those of yore, that the world today is on the side of freedom and universal political equality, that the war cry of the howling leaders of secession and treason is, let us drive back the advance guard of civil and religious freedom. Let us have more slave territory. Let us build stronger the tyrant system of slavery in the great American Republic. Remember, too, that your very presence among the troops of the North would inspire your oppressed brethren of the South with zeal for the overthrow of the tyrant system and confidence in the armies of the living God, the God of truth, justice, and equality to all men. All right, so that's Green's speech there. From here, we need to begin planning and composing our essay. Planning an organization. You have little time to plan. Remember, suggested 40 minutes per essay. That's tough just to write an essay in 40 minutes. On top of that, you're expected to plan, but plan you must. Annotate as you read, trying to predict where the author is going and what he or she doing. Annotations at this point should not be very thorough. You should simply use annotations to keep yourself focused and actively reading, trying to predict what's going on in the passage. Don't forget to first examine the rhetorical situation completely before you start asking yourself about rhetorical strategies or anything else. Once you've identified the rhetorical elements of the rhetorical situation, then go through and identify some rhetorical obstacles that the speaker faces. And then it's pretty clear what those strategies the speaker used to overcome them are. So always work in that order. Once you've identified the strategies that are prevalent in this piece, narrow your discussion down to just those that are most significant. You don't want to discuss every single strategy the author uses in here. There just isn't time, and that doesn't make for a very significant essay. So most of this planning, as we said, you don't have much time to plan. You don't have time to sit there and write out a lengthy outline. So you're going to be doing most of this planning in your head, but make sure that all the while your pen is moving. Anywhere in the white space on the page, just jotting down single words and short phrases that don't mean really anything to anyone outside of the context of you planning out this essay. But you have to keep that pen moving. And when making your final decisions, make sure you go back through any of your planning or your notes, through your annotations, and circle those important elements. Number them according to like body paragraph 1, body paragraph 2, so that will make it much easier for you to return to it while you're composing. Nothing is worse than getting into the middle of an essay, finishing your first body paragraph, and then kind of forgetting where you were going to go from there. So make sure that you plan all this out in your head, but still jot down notes, circle things, number things, so that it's so that the essay just sort of writes itself at that point. There are two ways to organize this type of essay, and we've done this before with our style analysis work. You can either organize it chronologically, where you discuss the various obstacles and strategies you see section by section, like section by section by section in the passage, like paragraph 1, paragraph 2, 3, and 4. This sort of a chronological organization, I say, presents your essay as sort of something that takes the reader on a tour bus through the rhetorical progression of the passage. That's just how I like to compare the chronological organization of an essay, going place to place to place on a linear progression through the passage. The other way to organize your essay is the holistic approach, where you discuss obstacles and strategies which recur throughout the passage over and over again. In this organization strategy, your essay sort of takes the reader on a balloon ride over the passage, showing the rhetorical threads which run throughout. So it's the difference between a linear examination and a more overview style of examination. Let's talk about some good practices. Always look at the rhetorical strategies as a means of overcoming situational obstacles. Too many students identify strategies in the essay or in the passage, but in their essay fail to explain why those strategies are employed. Force yourself to examine the ways in which the speaker accesses all the available means of persuasion, or at least those available means of persuasion that are most important to this essay. Next, illustrate your analysis with specific text evidence. This seems like a no-brainer. Use text evidence. You'd be surprised how many students fail to do this. Using direct quotation, using paraphrase, using summary evidence, all are okay. Just be specific in what you're referring to and where that thing is in the passage. Your readers are familiar with the passage. However, your readers don't have the passage memorized and aren't reading your mind. So make sure you reference paragraph numbers and line numbers. Don't forget to use the passage's subject matter as material for your introduction. Take what the passage is about and begin your essay with engaging statements on this subject matter. From there, after you've engaged your reader just with the general subject of the passage you're going to analyze, from there you can very easily transition into the rest of your introduction, which we'll talk more about at a later time. Next, identify the key elements of the rhetorical situation in your intro paragraph. So after you've engaged your reader, then you can sort of get into some of the key elements of the rhetorical situation in your paragraph. But be careful that you don't turn it into a book report. Be careful that you don't then spend 6 or 7 sentences telling me the exact same information that you read in the explanation at the very front of the passage. I know that information already. All you're doing is just explaining to me those elements of the rhetorical situation that are critical to the discussion you're about to provide. Next, don't forget to use a general, open-ended thesis statement which focuses on the rhetorical obstacles. Okay? Focus on the rhetorical obstacles in your thesis statement. This will give you room to draw specific conclusions in your concluding paragraph, summing up those rhetorical strategies. Okay? And it also keeps you from repeating yourself, as we've talked about in this class before. Next, when discussing emotional appeals, always identify the emotions and their causes. Don't simply state that the speaker, quote, appeals to pathos. Tell me instead, specify that the speaker, quote, attempts to excite indignation in his audience by doing such and such. Yeah, explaining what exactly the speaker does to incite indignation and why it's necessary, all of those things. So when you're discussing any sort of pathetic appeal, you have to give me some emotion words and you have to discuss their causes. You can't just say the speaker appeals to pathos and think that I know what you're talking about. When discussing character appeals, ethos appeals, always describe the speaker's persona. Don't simply state that the speaker, quote, appeals to ethos and move on. Specify that the speaker, quote, presents himself as just another American laborer, humble and proud, etc., etc. When discussing logical reasoning, when discussing the logos of a text, always paraphrase the line of reasoning that the speaker of the passage is presenting to you. Don't simply state that the speaker appeals to logos to do such and such. Specify that the speaker leads his audience to logically conclude that if they refuse to allow free African Americans to fight, then they are promoting the same discrimination they are fighting against, thus making them hypocrites, those sorts of things. If you're going to talk about an author's successful or effective logical reasoning, you've got to paraphrase what that reasoning is. Some bad practices, these are the things to avoid when writing a Q2 rhetorical analysis essay. Never, ever turn this assignment into a device hunt. We readers see this over and over again. That's not what the assignment asks you to do. Going back and looking at the prompt sheet, you can see it does not ask you which devices does the author use in this passage. It asks you about the rhetorical strategies the author uses to persuade. So don't go into the assignment asking yourself what devices does the speaker use in here. Ask yourself what rhetorical obstacles does the speaker face and what strategies does he or she employ to overcome them. If the author uses devices as part of these strategies, then mention them in your essay. By all means, mention them, but don't plan your essay around discussing devices. Next bad practice, never discuss only devices you can name. Knowing the names of devices is nice, but don't stress over it. Yeah, it's nice to use the nomenclature of rhetoric. It builds your ethos in the eyes of your reader, and it makes for a clearer discussion. But you don't need to throw around a lot of device names in this essay necessarily. This is an essay about rhetoric, not about devices. Simply discuss. If you don't know the name of the device, discuss in your own words the strategies the author employs. If you don't know what rhetoricians call this thing, who cares if you don't know the device name? Your readers don't care. All they care about is whether you can cogently analyze what's going on in the essay. Yeah, and sometimes keep in mind what you're looking at doesn't necessarily even have a name. More bad practices. Always avoid discussing the text appeal by appeal by appeal. Instead, discuss it strategy by strategy by strategy by strategy. This is an essay, not a checklist. Your readers do not want to read, here's what the logos is in this passage, here's the ethos, here's the pathos. Do not organize your essay by logos, ethos, pathos. Please, we've seen that a million times. And all that does is tell us that you don't really understand rhetorical strategy. You understand the checklist style of essay writing. Discuss the persuasion that is most key to the passage. Sometimes one of the appeals just isn't as central to the rhetoric of a text as another. Could you even conceivably write me a paragraph about the logos in John Edwards' Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God? Sure, but not if you were wanted to show me or wanted to explain to me the effectiveness of his speech, his sermon, because there is no effective logos in his sermon. So you'd want to talk mainly about the pathos. I would probably spend my entire essay just talking about emotional appeals and all the strategies he does there. So don't give equal time. This isn't the presidential election year. You don't have to give equal time to logos, ethos, pathos. Plus, keep in mind the three kinds of persuasion often influence one another, so why separate the discussion? A speaker can logically lead his or her audience to understand their own hypocrisy, which then evokes feelings of shame, which then blah, blah, blah. So since they all kind of bleed together and work together to create a whole piece, separating them is just kind of silly and contrived. More bad practices. Try not to refer to stylistic elements as strategies. This sounds like nitpicking, but here's what I mean. A rhetorical strategy is the way a speaker purposefully combats a rhetorical obstacle. Diction is not a strategy. Neither are rhetorical questions. Diction is simply an element of style. It's not even a device. Rhetorical questions, those are just devices. They're not strategies. A strategy might be something like this: the way the speaker uses emotionally charged word choice to create a distorted characterization of the American Communist Party so that he or she might excite his or her audience's fear or enmity toward this group. That's a strategy. Yeah, I've mentioned some style elements in there, but it's the use of style elements to do something in overcoming some obstacle. Saying that, quote, the speaker uses the strategies of diction, circular reasoning, and rhetorical questioning, which I actually pulled that as a straight quote off of a sample essay I looked at a minute ago, this makes you sound foolish because those aren't strategies. Next, avoid praising the speaker's abilities. There is no need to write about how skillfully or masterfully the speaker writes. You can comment on the effectiveness or ineffectiveness of the rhetoric, but complimenting the author is silly, and it makes you sound like you're just filling space in your essay, like you don't know what to write about, so you're just going to praise the author. Next bad practice, don't vomit up soaps and call it an intro paragraph. Don't just, go through the checklist of SOAPS in a series of sentences and call that an intro. This shows your reader that you know how to follow a formula but not how to write an essay. Begin your essay with an engaging opening statement related to the subject of the passage. Expand on this discussion for a couple of sentences, then transition into briefly introducing the passage's situation, but just regurgitating the subject, occasion, context, audience, purpose, speaker, one at a time in a paragraph, that sounds like a book report. That does not sound like an essay. All right, scoring guidelines. Like all AP essays, the Q2 is scored on that 0 to 9 scale. AP grades, AP graders, that's a typo, AP graders use a set of scoring guidelines. They do not use what we call a rubric. The essay is graded as a piece of writing, and rubrics don't score things as whole pieces. Rubrics break things up and chop things down. So keep in mind that they are grading your essay as a piece of writing, not as a collection of parts. Excuse me. The scoring guidelines use the same basic language year to year. All they really change is the author's name in each one. So let's take a look at an example of the scoring guidelines. Here are the scoring guidelines. This is just the one I've uploaded here, my generic scoring guidelines. You'll see it starts with the question 1, the Q1. You have to scroll down to page 4 to get to question 2. Excellent. It says up here at the top, the score should reflect a judgment of the essay's quality as a whole. Remember that students had only 40 minutes to read and write. The essay, therefore, is not a finished product and should not be judged by standards appropriate for an out-of-class assignment. Evaluate the essay as a draft, making certain to reward students for what they do well. I love that language at the beginning of every set of scoring guidelines because it reminds me of the tremendous pressure students are under in completing this assignment and what we're really looking for, which is a demonstration of competency, not necessarily of fluency. That sort of thing. All essays, even those scored 8 or 9, may contain occasional lapses in analysis, prose style, or mechanics. Such features should enter into the holistic evaluation of an essay's overall quality. In no case may an essay with many distracting errors in grammar and mechanics be scored higher than a 2. One thing you'll notice, making sure my mic's still on. One thing you'll notice right away is that the essay scores 1 through 9 are actually broken up into 4 sort of subcategories, if you could say that. 8 effective, 8 and 9 is considered effective. 6 and 7 is considered adequate. 5 is just kind of a score all by itself. 4 and 3 are kind of lumped together as inadequate. And then 2s and 1s are lumped together as little success, and then 0s and dashes are special cases altogether. Okay. Let's see. When I first start teaching these scoring guidelines, I always like to start with the 6 adequate. This is the baseline. Your essay is decent. It's decent. You have demonstrated competency in this domain of writing. So, 6 adequate. Essays earning a score of 6 adequately analyze how the speaker uses rhetorical strategies to achieve a specific purpose. They develop their analysis with evidence and explanations that are appropriate and sufficient, referring to the passage explicitly or implicitly. The writing may contain lapses in diction or syntax, but generally the prose is clear. Okay, so that's your baseline essay right there. It's the things that it discusses are appropriate. The evidence and explanations provided just appropriate and sufficient. They're good enough that I get what you're saying. They're just not overwhelmingly cogent. Referring to the passage explicitly or implicitly, explicitly would mean through direct text evidence. Implicitly would be through things like summary evidence, that sort of thing. The writing may contain lapses in diction or syntax, but generally, more times than not, the prose is clear. Not just understandable, but clear. Let's move one step up here to effective. We're skipping the middle scores for now because middle scores are just halfway between these things. Essays earning a score of 8 effectively analyze how the speaker uses rhetorical strategies to achieve a specific purpose. They develop their analysis with evidence and explanations that are appropriate and convincing, referring to the passage explicitly or implicitly. The prose demonstrates a consistent ability to control a wide range of the elements of effective writing, but is not necessarily flawless. Remember what we read at the very beginning. We're not looking for perfect essays because you just sat down in the testing room to write this. So what separates an 8 from a 6, an effective from an adequate? They develop their analysis with evidence and explanations that are appropriate and convincing. We've moved from sufficient to convincing. It's not just, good enough. It's, I'm nodding my head. I totally get what you're saying. Again, referring to the passage explicitly or implicitly, direct quote or summary evidence. The prose, this is the big thing that separates an effective essay. The prose, meaning how the student writes, demonstrates a consistent ability to control a wide range of the elements of effective writing. The student demonstrates their ability to, first of all, really good organizational skills, really good just prose skills. Their diction is appropriate, their word choice is excellent, their vocabulary is large, that sort of thing. Their syntactic structures are varied and sophisticated. They understand how to craft an intro paragraph, not just throw me right into the discussion. They understand what a conclusion's there for, those sorts of things. So the prose is just outstanding. Okay. A 9 is just a really good 8. Okay. Essays earning a score of 9 meet the criteria for a score of 8, and in addition are especially sophisticated in their argument, thorough in their development, or impressive in their control of language. These are just the select group of outstanding 8s that earn a 9. 7s are essays earning a score of 7, meet the criteria for a score of 6, but provide a more complete explanation, more thorough development, or a more mature prose style. So 7s are 6s, which feature way too many elements of an 8 to be ignored. Okay, they're an adequate essay, but every now and then throughout that piece, the student does things that would give it an 8. Still, it's too much not to earn an 8 by itself, because there's still a lot more that's adequate than that's effective, but there's too much effective in there to ignore. All right, let's take a look now at inadequate. Essays earning a score of 4 inadequately analyze how the speaker uses rhetorical strategies to achieve a specific purpose. These essays may misunderstand the passage, misrepresent the strategies used, or analyze these strategies inaccurately. It can do any of those 3 things and still earn a 4. The evidence and explanations used may be inappropriate, insufficient, or less convincing. It can be any of those 3 things to earn inadequate. The prose generally conveys the student's ideas, but may be less consistent in controlling the elements of effective writing. So I understand what the student is saying, but only in general terms. These essays are often very vague and just imprecise in their discussion. There's a lot more stuff in the inadequate scoring guidelines than in the 6 and the 8, and that's because there's a lot of different ways a student can be ineffective in their writing. They may misunderstand the passage. They may misrepresent the strategies. They may analyze them wrong. Any student does any one of those things, and it's an inadequate paper. Okay. A 5, one of the most common scores we see on essays, a 5 is halfway between adequate and inadequate. This is an inadequate paper that does some adequate things. Essays earning a score of 5 analyze how the speaker uses rhetorical strategies to achieve a specific purpose. The evidence or explanations may be uneven, meaning some of them are the adequate range, but some of them are inadequate range. The explanations may be inconsistent or limited. They're almost adequate, but the student just doesn't quite explain themselves fully. The writing may contain lapses in diction or syntax, but it usually conveys the student's ideas. It's not generally clear. It just sort of conveys the student's ideas. Okay. Finally, let's take a look at 2s. Essays earning a score of 2 demonstrate little success in analyzing how the speaker uses rhetorical strategies to achieve a specific purpose. These essays may misunderstand the prompt, misread the passage, fail to analyze the strategies used, or substitute a simpler task by responding to the prompt tangentially with unrelated, inaccurate, or inappropriate explanation. The prose often demonstrates consistent weakness in writing, such as grammatical problems, a lack of development of organization, or a lack of control. Essays that earn a score of 2 did not complete the task as the task was given to them. These students don't understand rhetorical analysis, or if they do, for whatever reason, they didn't write a rhetorical analysis paper. They wrote something else. They misunderstood the prompt, they misread the passage completely, they failed to analyze anything, or maybe they just paraphrased the whole passage or whatever. And once again, just as like we saw at the top, just pervasive grammatical errors will earn an automatic score of 2. A 3 is just like a slightly, actually, let me hang on just a second. Yeah, a 3 is somewhere between a 2 and a 4. It's really just a bad 4. It's a 4 with pervasive reasoning, with pervasive errors, pervasive vagueness. It's inexplicably short, those sorts of things. So a 3 is like the bare minimum you can get if you still do some level of rhetorical analysis, but it's just really bad rhetorical analysis and it's really short. You'll get a 3. Finally, a 1. I can't remember the last time I saw a 1. These are rare. Essays earning a score of 1 meet the criteria for 2, but are undeveloped, especially simplistic in their explanation, or weak in their control of language. Yeah, these are just the really, really bad 2s. And then finally, 0 indicates an on-topic response that receives credit, such as one that merely repeats the prompt. So we can't say that you were off topic because you repeated the prompt, or you just wrote down Green's speech and turned in that. That would get you a 0 and no points. All right, so those are the scoring guidelines that we use for that Q2 rhetorical analysis question. At the AP grading conference in June, hundreds of graders converged in some city in the Midwest, at several cities actually, to score these essays. First, a small committee reads essays until they find a representative of each score. They read a few dozen essays until they find a 9, an 8, a 7, 6, etc. This is what's called score setting. The complete score set is then shared with the entire conference and the grading commences. The AP essay scoring guidelines are really sound. I really like them, mainly because I hate grading essays according to rubrics, and I'd much prefer holistic methods like this. But I also think they work every time. But because the language in these scoring guidelines is so general, in order to really understand how each score point is achieved, you really need to see examples of how students have responded first. Each year, College Board publishes the previous year's essay questions and a selection of sample essays for this very process. So let's look at some sample essays. Here we have what College Board released back in 2003. This contains, these are actually just the sample responses. There's another PDF file that actually has all of the questions in there. And we're just going to look at the sample responses for that green speech that we just looked at. Starting with the speech that says up the upper right-hand corner, NN1. This is typically how they anonymously kind of mark their responses so that they can kind of keep up with them when they're putting their score sets together. They use letters and numbers and all that stuff. I believe this is technically essay NN in page 1. I think that's what that means. Anyway, let's read this one. The Civil War, a war fought during the 1860s, decided a great many things: slavery or freedom, South and North or unification. In the beginning of the war, the Northern African Americans were not allowed to join the Union Army and fight against the South, the Southern oppressors, that is. Alfred M. Greene, while giving a speech in Philadelphia at the beginning of the war, urged African Americans to prepare to enlist. He also spoke subversively about the unfairness of the treatment of African Americans, not only in the South, but also in the North. Greene uses a variety of methods to persuade his fellow African Americans. Notice how he abbreviated that there. Don't do too much of that, but if you're running out of time, do that. We get what you're saying. To prepare for war while also speaking out against the treatment of the African Americans in the North. Greene begins his speech by immediately mentioning the cornerstone of the American ideology, that American citizens believe in, quote, freedom of civil and religious toleration. By reminding the African Americans what America is founded on, he incites in them the desire to go to war against anyone opposing the idea. Greene, by the same token, reminds the whites of their unfairness in denying the African Americans their rights. The mention of the, quote, immortal Washington and Jackson also appeals to the patriotism in the African Americans, moving them closer to desire, or closer, I think he meant to desiring to fight in the war. The appeal Greene makes to the religious beliefs of the African Americans is apparent throughout his speech, because most of the African Americans at the time were Christian. By referring to their God as the God of truth, justice, and equality to all, don't know what that says, makes the African Americans feel obligated to help the cause of the Civil War. Because their God believes in, quote, freedom, why and how can they deny anyone else that right? At the same time, Greene also reminds the whites that their same God is the white God, and that the African Americans deserve rights as well. Greene also wants the African Americans to be, quote, trusting in God, because their God wants them to go to war and will protect them. Why should the African Americans not go to war? By the end of his speech, Greene begins to remind the African Americans of their oppressed brethren in the South. He reminds them of people under, quote, a tyrant system, and requests their assistance in overthrowing it. He also mentions the desire of the Southern leaders to, quote, drive back civil and religious freedom, have more slave territory. By mentioning the goals of the other side, he motivates the African Americans to battle by showing them the future of the nation if the South wins, because the future of the nation if the South wins, because they did not fight. Greene notes that their very presence on the battlefield will urge the slaves in the South to revolt. Green's word choice throughout his speech helps him to motivate African Americans battle without their real something. He constantly uses the phrase "let us" to persuade the African Americans to join the army without directly telling them to do so. A direct order is much less likely to be followed than a softer direction, such as "let us." He also includes himself with the African Americans by using the word us, making him seem motivated and desirous of joining the army as well. If he desires to join, why should they not? Green also anticipates certain rebuttals to his want of the African Americans joining the war to fight for an oppressive government, but he silences them by beginning his arguments with, "It is true." He wants the African Americans to know that he too realizes the problems with the government, but he is still willing to go to war. Although Green does make certain condescending arguments toward the white audience of the speech, by the end of the speech he was whited. He has united both African Americans and whites by focusing them against a common enemy, the South. He does want change, but he knows that defeating the Southern slavery system is much more pressing and important in the long run. Green is careful to, quote, hope for the future, but still improve the present. And he hopes not only the African Americans, but also the whites will do the same. All right. So, this particular essay has its flaws. Is it doing more good than bad? Yes, it is definitely on the adequate side of the scale. Is it effective or just adequate? This is actually an effective essay. The student is highly perceptive in some of the rhetorical features that the student discusses. Now, is it a little sloppy in places? Does the student kind of quit on some of his discussions in places? Sure, that does happen. But for a 40-minute timed essay, the student demonstrates not just competency, but real fluency in analyzing the rhetoric of a piece. What the student could have done quite a bit better was perhaps a more strict organization. Toward the end, the student's focus in his paragraph started to wane, but you know what? This is just a draft. At the end of the day, this student's prose demonstrates really high levels of skill in composition as far as rough drafts go. This was definitely an effective essay. Okay, it scored either an 8 or a 9. Oftentimes in class, you're going to hear me say either 8 or a 9 because sometimes 9s can be a little bit funky. This definitely at least scored an 8. All right, what I'd like you to do now is I'm not going to read the other essays to you. I want you to take a look at essay X and essay O here. Pause it, read those two, and then come back to me, and we'll take a look at what those scored. All right, starting with essay X here. Essay X is the one that started, "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times," wrote Charles Dickens in A Tale of Two Cities. That's a little hackneyed right off the bat, but at least the student understands how an intro paragraph is supposed to be crafted. This was definitely on the adequate side of the scale. It was by no means as good as the previous one, but it was definitely not an inadequate paper. So we're starting at a 6 here. Is this one better than a 6? Does this one demonstrate some level of fluency beyond just adequate? Yes, it does. There are elements in here that do demonstrate that it is actually an effective rhetorical analysis. Specifically, the student does demonstrate some precision in his or her writing here. In the second and third paragraphs, Mr. Green qualifies the fact that African Americans have been mistreated in the past in the United States of America. He does this to show that he has not forgotten the wrongs. Again, this student really could have helped themselves by referring specifically to what they're talking about, but this student understands concepts of qualification, those sorts of things. Let's see. Mr. Green attempts to persuade his fellow African Americans to fight, if not for... that's not what I was looking for. Yes. Let's see. Yeah, Mr. Green is not forgiving these grievances, only saying that they are in the past. That level of distinction that this student is making does kind of push it beyond the adequate. This essay scored a 7. This is a definite 7. It's not just a plain old adequate paper, but it has way too much in it that's not effective to be a full 8. So this one would have scored a 7. Let's take a look at O here. Double O is the essay, when I zoom in here, is the essay that begins, Green moving speech urges his fellow African Americans to enlist in the Union Army despite the way they have been treated. Right away, I know that this student is going to be less than adequate, or maybe they'll work their way into a 6. And I know this because they're just launching me right into the essay. This particular student doesn't understand how to craft an intro paragraph, so we're probably looking to start at a 6 and working down. He begins by discussing patriotism and love of country and freedom. It's like the student didn't even have an intro paragraph. In the next paragraph, Green begins to discuss issues specific to African Americans. He does not ignore the fact that even after fighting in several wars, they are still not recognized as citizens, but brave deeds of our fathers. That's just like, but brave deeds of our fathers have failed to bring us into recognition as citizens. I'm not sure how that quote goes with the rest of this sentence, because it was just kind of crudely done. But I get overall what the student is saying in here. I get what the analysis the student is making. So there's a lot in here that on a very general level the student is doing adequately, but at the end of the day, composition-wise, this is an inadequate paper. This would have scored a 5. Without a doubt. This would have been a 5. It's got elements of adequacy, but at the end of the day, the student's composition skills just bring it right down to that inadequate level. But it's the high inadequate. It's the 5, okay? That sort of thing. So, thank you for watching. That's all I have. We've looked at a lot of different things in this video. It's probably the longest video I've made to date. I hope you've learned a little bit about the Q2 rhetorical analysis essay. Next time I see you in class, we're going to look at a ton of sample essays, and we're going to score them because it's important that you learn how to be as good a scorer as I am. Thanks for watching. Feel free to watch again.